Imagine being sentenced to death, but instead of despairing, you make a revelation that changes everything. You might think it's just another tragic story, but the twist here is real and will leave your jaw dropping. Before we continue, leave a comment below telling me where you're watching this video from. I'd love to know. In the sprawling expanse of the Hollywood Hills, where dreams were said to take flight and ambitions soared to dizzying heights, there stood a mansion that seemed to touch the very sky itself. Its sleek lines and gleaming surfaces reflected the harsh California sun, a beacon of wealth and achievement that could be seen for miles around. Yet within its pristine walls, a different story unfolded, one of isolation, emptiness, and a soul-deep longing that no amount of money could satisfy. Lucas Crawford, the mansion's sole occupant, was a man who had everything and nothing all at once. At the tender age of 32, he had amassed a fortune that would make even the most seasoned tycoons green with envy. His business acumen was legendary, his rise to power meteoric. From tech startups to real estate empires, everything Lucas touched seemed to turn to gold. He was the darling of Wall Street, the poster child for the American dream, a self-made billionaire whose name was synonymous with success. But as Lucas stood on his glass balcony, watching the sun crest over the horizon for what felt like the 1,000th time, he felt nothing but a gnawing emptiness in the pit of his stomach. The view before him was breathtaking. A tapestry of pink and gold streaked across the sky, the city below slowly coming to life as the new day dawned. It was the kind of sight that should have inspired awe, gratitude, maybe even joy. Yet Lucas felt none of these things. The beauty of the moment slid off him like water off a duck's back, leaving him as cold and unmoved as ever. With a sigh that seemed to come from the very depths of his being, Lucas turned away from the sunrise and made his way back into the cavernous interior of his home. His bare feet padded silently across the polished marble floors, the sound of his movement swallowed up by the vastness of the space around him. Every surface gleamed with an almost painful perfection. Crystal vases filled with exotic flowers that were changed daily, priceless works of art adorning walls that had never known a fingerprint, furniture so exquisite it looked as though it had never been sat upon. It was a museum of luxury, a testament to what money could buy. But as Lucas moved through the rooms, he couldn't help but feel like an intruder in his own home. The emptiness of the space seemed to mock him, amplifying the hollowness he felt inside. He had spent years cultivating this life, building his empire piece by meticulous piece. And for what? To wake up each morning feeling more alone than ever? As he made his way to the kitchen, a gleaming expanse of stainless steel and marble that looked more like a spaceship than a place to prepare food, Lucas caught sight of his reflection in one of the many mirrors that adorned the walls. The face that stared back at him was handsome by any standard. Chiseled jawline, piercing blue eyes, a mop of dark hair artfully tousled in a way that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. But it was the expression in those eyes that gave him pause. They were empty, devoid of the fire and passion that had once driven him to such great heights. When had he become this person, this shell of a man going through the motions of a life he no longer recognized? Lucas tried to remember the last time he had felt truly alive, truly connected to the world around him. It had been years, so many years that the memory felt more like a dream than reality. He thought back to his childhood, to the boy he had once been. Lucas Crawford had not always been a name associated with wealth and power. There was a time when he was just Luke, a scrappy kid from the wrong side of the tracks with a head full of dreams and a heart full of determination. He had been fearless then, unafraid to take risks, to reach out and grab life with both hands. What had happened to that boy? The answer, of course, was simple. Life had happened. The harsh realities of the world had slowly but surely chipped away at his youthful optimism, replacing it with a cynicism that had served him well in the cutthroat world of business, but had left him woefully unprepared for the simple act of living. Every betrayal, every backstabbing associate, every fair-weather friend had taught Lucas a harsh lesson. Trust no one, rely on no one but yourself. It was a philosophy that had made him rich beyond his wildest dreams, but at what cost? As Lucas mindlessly went through the motions of preparing his breakfast, a green smoothie concocted by his personal nutritionist to provide optimal energy and focus, He couldn't help but wonder if it had all been worth it. His parents, once his biggest cheerleaders, were now strangers to him. The last time he had spoken to them had been, when? 5 years ago? 10. The realization that he couldn't even remember sent a sharp pang through his chest. They had begged him to slow down, to remember what was truly important in life. But Lucas, drunk on his own success and convinced of his invincibility, had pushed them away. "You don't understand," he had told them, his voice cold with a conviction he no longer felt. "This is what I was born to do." Now, as he stood in his empty kitchen, surrounded by all the trappings of success but bereft of any real human connection, Lucas wondered if perhaps it was he who hadn't understood. He had spent so long building walls to protect himself that he had forgotten how to let anyone in. The result was a life that looked perfect on paper but felt utterly meaningless in practice. As he sipped his smoothie, the taste barely registering on his palate, Lucas's mind drifted to the day ahead. There were meetings to attend, deals to close, money to be made. Once, the prospect would have filled him with a rush of excitement, the thrill of the game that he had always played so well. Now, it all felt like a tedious obligation, a never-ending cycle of acquisition and expansion that no longer brought him any joy. But what else was there? This was the life he had chosen, the path he had carved out for himself with single-minded determination. He had sacrificed everything for this: friendships, family, love, the simple pleasures that made life worth living. To admit now that it might all have been for nothing was more than he could bear. So Lucas did what he always did. He pushed the doubts and regrets to the back of his mind, locked them away in a box labeled "Do Not Open." He straightened his shoulders, smoothed down his expertly tailored shirt, and prepared to face another day as the Lucas Crawford the world expected him to be: confident, ruthless, unstoppable. But as he made his way to the garage, where a fleet of luxury cars awaited his choice, Lucas couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to change. It was an odd sensation, a prickling at the back of his neck that he couldn't explain. For a moment he paused, his hand hovering over the keys to his favorite sports car. The silence of the house pressed in around him, oppressive in its totality. And then, breaking through the stillness, came the sound of the mail slot opening and closing. It was such a mundane noise, so out of place in the rarefied atmosphere of Lucas's world, that for a moment he thought he must have imagined it. But no, there it was again, the soft thud of something landing on the marble floor of the entryway. Curious, despite himself, Lucas retraced his steps. There, lying innocuously on the gleaming floor, was a single envelope. It was unremarkable in every way, plain white paper, slightly creased from its journey. But the sight of it filled Lucas with an inexplicable sense of foreboding. He bent to pick it up, his fingers closing around the rough paper. The return address made his breath catch in his throat. It was from a prison, a place so far removed from his world of wealth and privilege that it might as well have been on another planet. And there, written in a cramped, unfamiliar hand, was his name. Not Lucas Crawford, billionaire extraordinaire, but simply Luke. For a long moment, Lucas stood frozen, the letter burning a hole in his hand. Every instinct screamed at him to throw it away, to pretend he had never seen it. Nothing good could come from opening this Pandora's box, from allowing the messy, complicated realities of the outside world to intrude on the carefully constructed fortress of his life. But something, call it fate, call it curiosity, call it the last desperate gasp of the boy he used to be, made Lucas break the seal. As he unfolded the letter, his eyes scanning the words written there, he had no way of knowing that this simple act would be the catalyst for a journey that would change everything. The life he had built, the man he had become, the very foundations of his world. All of it was about to be shaken to its core. And so, with trembling hands and a heart that beat a nervous tattoo against his ribs, Lucas Crawford began to read. The crisp white paper crinkled softly in Lucas's hands as he unfolded the letter, his eyes darting across the page with increasing urgency. The handwriting was messy, almost childlike in its awkward loops and uneven lines, but the words themselves carried a weight that seemed to press down on Lucas's chest, making it difficult to breathe. "Dear Luke," the letter began, and already Lucas felt a jolt of unease. No one had called him Luke in years. It was a name that belonged to another life, another person, a boy who had long since been buried beneath layers of success and cynicism. As he read on, the world around him seemed to fade away. The opulent surroundings of his mansion, the pressing obligations of his day, even the very ground beneath his feet, all of it receded into the background, leaving nothing but the words on the page and the thundering of his own heart. The letter was from a boy named Evan, just 16 years old and facing a fate that no child should ever have to contemplate. He wrote of cold prison cells and endless nights, of a justice system that had failed him and a world that had turned its back. But more than that, he wrote of a connection, a bond that stretched across time and circumstance, linking him inexorably to the man Lucas had become. "You don't know me," Evan wrote, his pen having pressed so hard into the paper that Lucas could feel the indentations on the back of the sheet. "But I know you. I've spent years piecing together the puzzle of my past, following a trail that led me through foster homes and dead ends, always searching for the missing piece that would make my life make sense. And now, against all odds, I've found it. I've found you, Luke. My brother." The words seemed to leap off the page, striking Lucas with the force of a physical blow. Brother. It was impossible, unthinkable. He was an only child. He knew this with absolute certainty. His parents, for all their faults, would never have kept such a monumental secret from him. Would they? But as Lucas read on, doubt began to creep in. Evan's words painted a picture of a past that Lucas had never known existed, a mother driven to desperate measures, a child given up in the hopes of a better life, and another left behind to face the harsh realities of a world that cared little for lost boys. "I don't blame you," Evan wrote, and Lucas could almost hear the resignation in the boy's voice. "How could I? You were just a baby, same as me. We were both pawns in a game we didn't understand, moved around by forces beyond our control. But now we have a chance to change the rules, to rewrite our story." Lucas's hands were shaking so badly by this point that he could barely make out the words. His mind raced, trying to reconcile the life he had always known with this new, earth-shattering information. A brother, a family he had never known existed. It was too much to process, too overwhelming to be real. But there was more. As Lucas forced himself to keep reading, he felt the blood drain from his face. Evan wasn't just reaching out to establish a long-lost connection. He was crying out for help from the only person he believed could save him. "I know this is a lot to take in," the letter continued, "and I wouldn't blame you if you stopped reading right now. But please, Luke, I'm begging you to hear me out. I'm in trouble, the kind of trouble that doesn't just go away. They say I killed someone, but I swear to you, I'm innocent. I was in the wrong place at the wrong time, caught up in something I didn't understand. And now they want to kill me for it." The words seemed to hover in the air, each one a heavy stone dropping into the pit of Lucas's stomach. Death row. His brother, this stranger who shared his blood, was facing execution for a crime he swore he didn't commit. The magnitude of it was almost too much to comprehend. "I know I have no right to ask anything of you." Evan's letter concluded, the writing becoming more frantic, as if he feared he might run out of time before he could say everything he needed to say. "You don't know me, don't owe me anything. But you're my last hope, Luke. The system has failed me, and I'm running out of time. If there's any part of you that believes in justice, in family, in doing what's right, please, help me. I don't want to die." The letter ended there, but its echo seemed to reverberate through Lucas's entire being. He stood frozen in place, the paper clutched in his hands, his mind a whirlwind of conflicting thoughts and emotions. Part of him wanted to crumple the letter up, to throw it away and pretend he had never seen it. It would be so easy to dismiss it as a scam, a desperate ploy by a condemned man grasping at straws. But something deeper, something that resonated in the very marrow of his bones, told Lucas that this was real. The raw emotion in Evan's words, the details that seemed too specific to be fabricated, all of it pointed to a truth that Lucas wasn't sure he was ready to face. For the first time in years, Lucas felt truly lost. The carefully constructed world he had built for himself, with its clear lines and defined boundaries, was crumbling around him. In its place was a chaotic swirl of possibilities and responsibilities that he had never asked for, never wanted. What was he supposed to do? Rush off to save a brother he had never known existed? Upend his entire life based on the words of a stranger? The very idea was ludicrous. He had meetings to attend, deals to close, an empire to run. He couldn't just drop everything because of one letter. And yet, as Lucas stood there in the echoing emptiness of his mansion, he felt something stir within him. It was a feeling he had almost forgotten, buried beneath years of cynicism and self-interest. It was empathy, compassion, the faintest glimmer of the boy he used to be, reaching out across the years to remind him of who he could have been. Before he even realized what he was doing, Lucas found himself moving. He strode through the house with purpose, his mind racing ahead of his feet. He needed to make calls, to cancel appointments, to set things in motion. If there was even the slightest chance that what Evan had written was true, he couldn't just stand by and do nothing. As he reached for his phone, Lucas caught sight of his reflection once more. The man staring back at him was different from the one he had seen just moments ago. There was a fire in his eyes now, a determination that had been missing for far too long. For better or for worse, Lucas Crawford's life was about to change. The journey ahead would be fraught with challenges, would test him in ways he had never been tested before. But as he dialed the number for his private jet, preparing to embark on a mission he never could have anticipated, Lucas felt something he hadn't experienced in years. He felt alive. The sleek private jet cut through the sky like a silver arrow, its engines humming with quiet efficiency as it carried Lucas Crawford away from the world he knew and toward an uncertain future. From his plush leather seat, Lucas stared out the window, watching the landscape below change from the sprawling urban maze of Los Angeles to the patchwork quilt of farmland and forest that marked America's heartland. It had been less than 6 hours since he had read Evan's letter, and already Lucas felt as though he had stepped into another life. The frantic flurry of activity that followed his decision to act was a blur in his memory. Canceling meetings, delegating responsibilities, arranging for the jet to be prepared. He had moved on autopilot, driven by an urgency he didn't fully understand but couldn't ignore. Now, as the miles stretched out beneath him, Lucas finally had a moment to breathe, to think, to grapple with the enormity of what he was doing. His fingers absently traced the edges of the letter, now slightly crumpled from being read and reread countless times. Each word was etched into his mind, a haunting refrain that echoed with every beat of his heart. Brother, innocent, help me. The weight of those words pressed down on him, a burden he had never asked to bear, but now found himself unable to set aside. As the jet soared over Middle America, Lucas's mind wandered back to his childhood, searching for any clue, any hint that might validate Evan's claims. Had there been hushed conversations he wasn't meant to overhear? Meaningful glances between his parents that he had dismissed as insignificant? Try as he might, Lucas couldn't recall anything that would suggest the existence of a secret sibling. His childhood memories, once so clear and comforting, now felt like a facade, a carefully constructed illusion designed to hide a truth too painful to confront. The irony of his situation wasn't lost on Lucas. Here he was, one of the most powerful men in the country, capable of moving markets with a single word, and yet he felt utterly powerless in the face of this unexpected revelation. All his wealth, all his influence seemed meaningless in the context of what lay ahead. For the first time in years, Lucas Crawford was stepping into a situation he couldn't control, couldn't manipulate to his advantage. The thought was both terrifying and strangely exhilarating. As the jet began its descent, Lucas steeled himself for what was to come. He had done his research during the flight, poring over every scrap of information he could find about Evan's case. The details were sparse, the legal jargon opaque, but the broad strokes painted a grim picture. Evan had been convicted of murder, a crime that had shocked the small Midwestern town where it had taken place. The evidence, according to the reports, was circumstantial but damning. A young life cut short, a community out for blood, and a scared teenager caught in the middle of it all. But there were inconsistencies, details that didn't quite add up, witness statements that contradicted each other, evidence that seemed to have been overlooked or dismissed. It wasn't much, but it was enough to plant a seed of doubt in Lucas's mind. What if Evan was telling the truth? What if an innocent boy was about to pay the ultimate price for a crime he didn't commit? The thought sent a chill down Lucas's spine. He had always prided himself on his ability to see the bigger picture, to make tough decisions for the greater good. But this was different. This was personal in a way nothing in his life had ever been before. For the first time in as long as he could remember, Lucas found himself caring about something beyond his own success and security. As the jet touched down on the small regional airport's runway, Lucas took a deep breath, steeling himself for what lay ahead. He had no illusions about the difficulty of the task before him. Overturning a death sentence, proving the innocence of a convicted murderer. These were not challenges that could be solved with money alone. He would need every ounce of his intelligence, his resourcefulness, and his determination. But more than that, Lucas realized as he stepped off the plane and into the harsh Midwestern sunlight, he would need to rediscover parts of himself that he had long since buried. Compassion, empathy, the ability to connect with others on a human level. These were qualities that had no place in the cutthroat world of high finance, but they would be essential in the fight ahead. As he made his way to the waiting car, Lucas caught sight of his reflection in the window. The man staring back at him was a stranger, not the polished, confident tycoon he had cultivated for so long, but someone more vulnerable, more human. For a moment, Lucas felt a flash of panic. Was he really ready for this? Could he truly be the person Evan needed him to be? But then, as if in answer to his unspoken doubts, a memory surfaced. It was hazy, more feeling than concrete image, but it filled Lucas with a warmth he hadn't experienced in years. He remembered being a child, standing up to a bully who was picking on a smaller kid at school. He remembered the rush of righteousness, the unshakable certainty that he was doing the right thing, no matter the consequences. That feeling, long dormant, stirred to life within him now. Whatever lay ahead, whatever challenges he might face, Lucas knew in that moment that he was exactly where he needed to be. The road ahead would be difficult, fraught with obstacles and uncertainties, but for the first time in years, Lucas Crawford felt truly alive. As he slid into the back seat of the car, Lucas pulled out his phone and made a call. "It's Crawford," he said, his voice steady and determined. "I need everything you can get me on the case of Evan Matthews. And I mean everything. Leave no stone unturned." The die was cast. The journey had begun. And Lucas Crawford, billionaire tycoon turned unlikely crusader for justice, was ready to face whatever came next. The prison loomed before Lucas like a monolithic testament to human suffering, its gray walls stretching towards a sky that seemed equally bleak and unforgiving. As he stepped out of the car, the chill in the air seemed to seep into his very bones, a physical manifestation of the dread that had been building inside him since the moment he decided to make this journey. For a man accustomed to the gleaming skyscrapers and luxurious boardrooms of the corporate world, the stark brutality of the prison was a shock to the system. The razor wire glinted menacingly in the wan sunlight, a cruel reminder of the fate that awaited those trapped within these walls. And somewhere in this labyrinth of concrete and steel was Evan, the brother he had never known, the stranger whose desperate plea had turned his world upside down. As Lucas approached the entrance, he found himself second-guessing every decision that had led him to this moment. What was he doing here? What could he, a man more acquainted with spreadsheets than criminal law, possibly hope to achieve? The doubts swirled in his mind, threatening to overwhelm him, but he pushed them aside with a determination born of desperation. He had come too far to turn back now. The process of entering the prison was a study in humiliation and dehumanization. Lucas, used to being treated with deference and respect, found himself stripped of his dignity along with his personal belongings. The guard's perfunctory pat-down felt like an invasion, a harsh reminder that in this world, his wealth and status meant nothing. Here, he was just another visitor, no different from the weary-looking women and children he saw waiting in the visiting area. As he was led through a series of heavy metal doors, each clanging shut behind him with a finality that made his heart race, Lucas tried to prepare himself for the meeting ahead. What would he say to Evan? How could he possibly begin to bridge the chasm of years and circumstance that separated them? The questions tumbled through his mind, each one more daunting than the last. And then, suddenly, there was no more time to prepare. Lucas found himself standing in a small, Spartan room, its walls a dingy shade of beige that seemed designed to sap the hope from anyone unfortunate enough to find themselves within. A table and two chairs, bolted to the floor, stood in the center of the room like an island in a sea of despair. And there, being led in through another door, was Evan. Lucas's breath caught in his throat as he laid eyes on his brother for the first time. The boy, for despite his circumstances, Evan was still very much a boy, was smaller than Lucas had imagined, his frame seeming to shrink even further under the harsh fluorescent lights. His prison jumpsuit hung loosely on his thin frame, and dark circles under his eyes spoke of countless sleepless nights. But it was Evan's eyes that truly captured Lucas's attention. They were a startling shade of blue, eerily similar to his own, and they burned with an intensity that belied his youth. Those eyes locked onto Lucas the moment Evan entered the room, filled with a mixture of hope, fear, and something else. A desperate longing that made Lucas's heart constrict painfully in his chest. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The silence stretched between them, heavy with the weight of unasked questions and unspoken truths. Lucas found himself paralyzed, all his carefully prepared words deserting him in the face of this reality. It was Evan who finally broke the silence. "You came," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Those two simple words carried a world of emotion, relief, gratitude, and a fragile hope that threatened to shatter Lucas's composure entirely. "I came," Lucas replied, his own voice sounding strange and distant to his ears. He gestured awkwardly to the chairs. "Should we sit?" They settled into the hard plastic seats, the table between them feeling like an insurmountable barrier. Lucas found himself studying Evan's face, searching for similarities, for some tangible proof of their shared blood. The shape of Evan's jaw, the set of his brow, there was something hauntingly familiar about them, like looking at a distorted reflection of himself. "I wasn't sure you'd believe me," Evan said, his fingers fidgeting nervously on the table. "I know how crazy it must have sounded, getting a letter like that out of the blue." Lucas nodded, struggling to find the right words. "It was unexpected," he finally managed. "But something about it, I couldn't just ignore it, even if I wanted to." A ghost of a smile flitted across Evan's face, there and gone so quickly that Lucas might have imagined it. "Yeah, I get that. Believe me, I've had plenty of time to think about how insane this whole situation is. But I swear to you, Luke, every word I wrote is true. We are brothers, and I am innocent." The conviction in Evan's voice was palpable, and Lucas found himself wanting desperately to believe him. But years of cynicism and self-preservation were hard to shake off. "Tell me everything," he said, leaning forward. "From the beginning. I need to understand." And so, in that dreary prison visiting room, Evan began to unravel the tangled skein of their shared past. He spoke of their mother, a woman driven to desperation by poverty and circumstance, of the impossible choice she had made, giving up one child in the hopes of securing a better life for both, of years spent bouncing between foster homes, always searching for a sense of belonging that remained frustratingly out of reach. As Evan talked, Lucas found himself hanging on every word, his mind struggling to reconcile this new reality with everything he had believed about his life. The parents he thought he knew, the childhood he remembered, all of it was cast in a new unsettling light. But it was when Evan began to speak of the crime he was accused of that Lucas truly felt the ground shift beneath his feet. The boy's words painted a picture of a night gone horribly wrong, of being in the wrong place at the wrong time, caught up in events beyond his control. Evan spoke of fear and confusion, of a justice system more interested in closing cases than finding truth. "I didn't kill anyone, Luke," Evan said, his eyes shining with unshed tears. "I swear on our mother's memory, I'm innocent, but nobody would listen. Nobody cared enough to look deeper. Until you. The weight of Evan's gaze, the rawness of his emotion, hit Lucas like a physical blow. In that moment, all his doubts, all his reservations, seemed to melt away. Whether it was some deep-seated biological instinct or simply the undeniable humanity of Evan's plea, Lucas knew with a certainty that surprised him that he believed his brother. "I believe you," Lucas said, the words coming out with a force that startled them both. "And I'm going to help you. Whatever it takes, we're going to prove your innocence." The look of pure relief and gratitude on Evan's face was almost too much for Lucas to bear. For the first time, he truly understood the enormity of what he was undertaking. This wasn't just about uncovering the truth or righting a wrong. It was about saving a life, the life of a brother he never knew he had, but who now seemed as essential to him as breathing. As their time together drew to a close, Lucas reached across the table, bridging the physical and emotional distance between them. His hand closed around Evan's, a gesture of solidarity and promise. "We're in this together now," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You're not alone anymore." Evan's fingers tightened around his, a lifeline in a stormy sea. "Thank you," he whispered, those two words carrying the weight of years of loneliness and fear. As Lucas was led out of the visiting room, Evan's desperate gaze following him until the last possible moment, he felt a sense of purpose crystallize within him. The path ahead would be difficult, fraught with challenges he could scarcely imagine. But Lucas Crawford, the man who had conquered the business world through sheer force of will, was ready to fight. For Evan, for justice, for the chance to rewrite a story that had gone so terribly wrong. As he stepped back into the outside world, the sun breaking through the clouds in a moment of serendipitous symbolism, Lucas took a deep breath. The air tasted of possibility and determination. The game had changed, the stakes higher than he had ever faced before. But for the first time in longer than he could remember, Lucas Crawford felt truly, vibrantly alive. The days that followed Lucas's visit to the prison passed in a whirlwind of activity, each hour bringing new challenges and revelations. Lucas threw himself into Evan's case with a fervor that surprised even him, his legendary focus and determination now channeled into a cause far removed from the world of high finance. His penthouse suite at the local hotel, once a symbol of his detachment from the world around him, had been transformed into a war room of sorts. The walls were covered with timelines, witness statements, and crime scene photos, a grim collage that told the story of a night gone horribly wrong. Lucas pored over every detail, his keen analytical mind searching for patterns, inconsistencies, anything that might point to Evan's innocence. But it quickly became clear that this was not a battle that could be won through sheer force of will alone. The legal system, with its labyrinthine processes and arcane rules, was a foreign territory to Lucas. He needed help, expertise that went beyond his own considerable abilities. And so, swallowing his pride, Lucas reached out to an old acquaintance, Sarah Donovan, a brilliant defense attorney known for taking on impossible cases. Their history was complicated, marked by a failed romance and years of mutual avoidance. But when Lucas called, explaining the situation in a voice that betrayed more vulnerability than he had intended, Sarah didn't hesitate. "I'll be there in the morning," she said, her voice crackling over the phone line. "This isn't going to be easy, Lucas. You know that, right?" Lucas gazed out the window at the small Midwestern town, so far removed from the glittering cities he was used to. "I know," he replied softly, "but it's the right thing to do." Sarah's arrival brought a new energy to their makeshift investigation. She approached Evan's case with a methodical precision that both impressed and frustrated Lucas. Where he wanted to charge ahead, fueled by emotion and a growing sense of urgency, Sarah insisted on building their case carefully, leaving no stone unturned. "We get one shot at this, Lucas," she reminded him gently but firmly. "We can't afford to rush in half-cocked. Evan's life depends on us getting this right." And so they worked, day and night, sifting through mountains of evidence, tracking down reluctant witnesses, and slowly piecing together the true events of that fateful night. It was grueling, often disheartening work. For every step forward, It seemed they took 2 steps back. The prosecution's case, while circumstantial, was tightly woven. Unraveling it would take more than just determination. It would take a miracle. But as the days turned into weeks, something began to change. It wasn't just the case that was evolving, but Lucas himself. The man who had once viewed the world solely through the lens of profit and loss found himself deeply moved by the stories he uncovered, tales of poverty, desperation, and lives balanced on a knife's edge. He thought of Evan, trapped in a concrete cell while life passed him by, and of all the other Evans out there, caught in a system that seemed designed to crush rather than rehabilitate. The weight of this realization settled heavily on Lucas's shoulders, a burden he had never before considered, but now found impossible to ignore. As he and Sarah worked tirelessly to build their case, Lucas felt a fundamental shift occurring within himself. The cold, calculating businessman who had arrived in this small town weeks ago was slowly giving way to someone new, someone who cared deeply, who felt the pain of others as if it were his own. It was terrifying and exhilarating all at once, like waking up from a long, dreamless sleep to find the world bursting with color and possibility. It was on a crisp autumn morning, as the trees outside the hotel window blazed with fiery reds and golds, that the breakthrough finally came. Sarah burst into the room, her eyes alight with a fierce excitement that Lucas had never seen before. "We've got it," she breathed, her voice trembling with barely contained emotion. "The alibi witness, the one nobody could find. I found her." Lucas felt his heart skip a beat, scarcely daring to hope. "Are you sure? Will she testify?" Sarah nodded, a smile breaking across her face like the sun emerging from behind storm clouds. "She's scared, but she's willing to come forward. Lucas, her testimony places Evan miles away from the crime scene at the time of the murder. This could be the key to everything." The room seemed to spin around Lucas as the implications sank in. After weeks of dead ends and dashed hopes, they finally had a real chance. A chance to save Evan, to right a terrible wrong, to prove that justice was more than just a hollow promise. But even as elation surged through him, Lucas felt a nagging doubt. "Will it be enough?" he asked, voicing the fear that had haunted him from the beginning. "Can one witness really overturn a conviction like this?" Sarah's expression sobered, but the determination in her eyes never wavered. "It's a start," she said firmly. "And combined with the inconsistencies we've uncovered in the prosecution's case, the questionable tactics of the investigating officers, we have a real shot, Lucas, but it's going to be the fight of our lives." Lucas nodded, squaring his shoulders as if preparing for a physical battle. "Then let's fight," he said, his voice ringing with a conviction that surprised even him. "Whatever it takes, we're going to win this." The weeks that followed were a blur of motion and emotion. Lucas and Sarah worked around the clock preparing their case, rehearsing arguments, and steeling themselves for the courtroom battle to come. Through it all, Lucas made daily trips to the prison, his bond with Evan growing stronger with each visit. He watched as hope slowly rekindled in his brother's eyes, saw the way Evan straightened his shoulders, and lifted his chin as the day of the hearing approached. It was a transformation that mirrored Lucas's own internal journey, from despair to determination, from isolation to connection. And then finally, the day arrived. The courtroom was packed, the air thick with tension and anticipation. Lucas sat behind the defense table, his heart pounding so loudly he was sure everyone could hear it. As the judge entered and the proceedings began, he caught Evan's eye, offering a small nod of encouragement. Whatever happened, they were in this together. What followed was a legal battle unlike anything Lucas had ever experienced. Sarah was magnificent, her arguments sharp and incisive, cutting through the prosecution's case with surgical precision. She presented their new evidence with a clarity and conviction that seemed to resonate with everyone in the room. But it was when the alibi witness took the stand that Lucas felt the tide truly turn. Her testimony was compelling, her recollection of the night in question clear and unwavering. As she spoke, Lucas saw doubt creep into the eyes of the jurors, saw the prosecutor's confident demeanor begin to crack. Hours turned into days, and still the hearing went on. Expert witnesses were called, evidence was re-examined, and long-buried truths were finally brought to light. Through it all, Lucas remained a steady presence, his unwavering belief in Evan's innocence, a beacon of hope in the storm of legal arguments and counter-arguments. And then, after what felt like an eternity, it was over. The judge retired to consider the new evidence, leaving Lucas, Evan, and their small team to wait in agonizing suspense. The hours crept by, each minute feeling like a lifetime. When the bailiff finally announced that the judge had reached a decision, Lucas felt as though he might be sick. This was it. The moment that would determine not just Evan's fate, but the course of both their lives. As they filed back into the courtroom, Lucas reached out and squeezed Evan's shoulder, a silent promise that whatever happened, he wouldn't face it alone. The judge's voice, when it came, seemed to fill the entire world. In light of the new evidence presented, and after careful consideration of the arguments put forth by both the defense and the prosecution, I have no choice but to vacate the conviction of Evan Matthews. Mr. Matthews, you are hereby released from custody, pending a new trial. The words hung in the air for a moment, their meaning too monumental to process immediately. And then the courtroom erupted. Cheers and sobs of relief mingled with the shocked murmurs of those who had been certain of Evan's guilt. But for Lucas, the entire world narrowed to a single point, the look of pure, unadulterated joy on his brother's face. In that moment, as Evan turned to him with tears streaming down his cheeks, Lucas felt something inside him shift and settle. The emptiness that had plagued him for so long, the gnawing sense that something was missing from his life, it all melted away, replaced by a warmth and fullness he had never known was possible. In the months that followed, life changed dramatically for both Lucas and Evan. The prosecution, their case in tatters, eventually dropped all charges against Evan. He was free, truly free, for the first time in years. Lucas, for his part, found that he couldn't simply return to his old life. The experience had changed him too profoundly, had opened his eyes to a world beyond profit margins and corporate takeovers. He established a foundation dedicated to criminal justice reform, using his wealth and influence to fight for those who had been wrongly convicted. Evan, after some initial struggles adjusting to life outside prison walls, found his footing. With Lucas's support, he enrolled in college, determined to make the most of the second chance he had been given. The brothers grew closer, their bond strengthening as they navigated this new chapter of their lives together. As for Lucas, he discovered that the emptiness that had once defined his existence was gone, replaced by a sense of purpose and connection he had never thought possible. He still had his moments of doubt, still struggled with the weight of his past choices. But now, when he looked in the mirror, he saw more than just a successful businessman. He saw a brother, a friend, a man who had learned that true wealth lay not in bank accounts, but in the lives he touched and the differences he made. One crisp autumn evening, almost a year to the day since he had received Evan's letter, Lucas stood on the balcony of his Hollywood Hills mansion. The sun was setting, painting the sky in brilliant hues of orange and pink. But unlike before, when such beauty had left him cold and unmoved, Lucas felt a surge of gratitude and wonder. Evan appeared at his side, a textbook tucked under his arm and a smile on his face. "Penny for your thoughts?" he asked, bumping Lucas's shoulder companionably. Lucas smiled, a genuine, unguarded expression that would have been foreign to him just a year ago. "Just thinking about how much can change in a year," he said softly. "About second chances and new beginnings." Evan nodded, his eyes distant as he gazed out at the sunset. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked after a moment. "Getting involved, I mean? Turning your whole life upside down for a stranger?" Lucas turned to his brother, really looking at him. He saw the lingering shadows of pain in Evan's eyes, the scars left by years of injustice and loneliness. But he also saw strength there, and hope, and a resilience that never failed to humble him. "Not for a second," Lucas said, his voice firm and sure. "You weren't a stranger, Evan. You were family, and you reminded me of what that really means." As the last rays of sunlight faded from the sky, the two brothers stood side by side, their shadows merging into one. The road ahead was uncertain, filled with challenges neither of them could foresee. But for the first time in his life, Lucas Crawford wasn't afraid of the unknown. He had found something far more valuable than all the wealth and success he had once chased so relentlessly. He had found family, purpose, and a chance to make a real difference in the world. And as the first stars began to twinkle in the darkening sky, Lucas knew with absolute certainty that this moment, this feeling, this newfound sense of belonging, was what he had been searching for all along. It wasn't an ending, not really. It was a beginning. A chance to write a new story, one filled with hope, redemption, and the unbreakable bonds of brotherhood. And Lucas Crawford, once lost but now found, was ready to embrace every word of it.